Hello, I'm Jonathan Bowman-Perks, and welcome back to my favourite time of the week. And I'm very delighted to have Major General Chapman. And Chip had a very successful career, that amazing combination of being airborne forces as a power officer, but also being bright and at the sort of top end of his generation. And after his time in the army, he's now an advisor on everything from cyber to strategy, sought after on TV shows and Today programmes about his views. So Chip, great having you here.
Good to be here, Jonathan.
Tell us a bit about, in a nutshell, about your career and the things you've packed in your life thus far.
Well, I did 33 years in the military, and it really went from a position of conscious incompetence to one where I was subconsciously competent. But it was a struggle at the beginning, because although I was deemed to be quite clever and I was the only one in my generation to get a first class honours degree in those days, for example, I wasn't actually very well trained to begin with. In the good old days, the parachute regiment didn't send officers to the platoon commander's division until they'd converted to a regular commission or had extended their careers.
Yeah.
So I did a very, very short course at Sandhurst. It was only 17 weeks at the time. It was a thing called POSIT 9 because university graduates knew how to strip and assemble an SLR and put on their puttees and all those sorts of things. So we were deemed to be military competent to a certain degree without having the tactical and intellectual tools to provide us what we really needed at the starts of our careers. And in a sense, my career was saved by going to war, because the thing that Sandhurst had really taught me was how to do platoon attacks, and I could do that fairly well in the Falkland Island campaign.
Yeah.
Then I became ruthlessly professional, and the Damascene moment where that occurred was in my third tour, really, when I was an instructor at the Platoon Commander's Division. I was taking over from an officer, and I was sitting at the back for 2 weeks on a TA course, a reserve course, and I thought, I don't understand 80% of what this guy's talking about. And then I ruthlessly went away and read every British Army pamphlet. Wow. And that was the moment when I became professional, truly professional. And from that moment on, I then took that forward, and absolutely to this day, despite my advanced age, still believe in continuous professional development in whatever sphere one's doing.
Good. And as well as the things you learnt on the way, you learnt from people. And who would you look back on, or even who you work with now and still know now, as a couple of inspiring leaders, and what qualities do you admire about them?
Well, there are two really stand out for me. One is John Crossland, who was my company commander in the Falklands. And John Crossland was really...
You were in the Falklands with him?
Yeah, I was in his company, B Company 2 Power. And he stood out for really being a charismatic leader. And he was a charismatic leader in the sense of it was we could do anything, not I can do anything. And he inspired the organisation he led both with vertical cohesion between leader and led, and horizontal cohesion between all the blokes at the bottom of the food chain. And if you could really almost see this as a religious experience, it was the point where he sanctified us with vertical cohesion and with horizontal cohesion.
That's great. And who else inspired you?
The second one was really at the top of my career, where John Crossland, of course, was direct leadership at the lowest level. The one who really inspired me near the end of my career was Jim Mattis, strategic leadership, who commanded at the time US Central Command and went on, of course, to be the SecDef in the USA. And he also was a very charismatic leader, but you could also see that he was the product of continuous professional development in his own sphere. He'd read over 1,000 books, he could quote things from most of these books, and he was just an inspiring guy who could pithily tell you bon mots which would lead you to absolute understanding. And a number of them have stood with me, of which the most illuminating in a sense is his line about if you have good people and bad process wins 9 times out of 10. And for me, that is the essence of the difference between management and leadership. Because if you haven't got those good processes, which are really managerial things, you can't build on the leadership which should encircle all that.
Yeah. Have you stayed in touch with Jim Mattis?
I do occasionally, but of course he's very elevated now and he's a very busy man.
Yeah, no, very interesting. And then what about some of the tips that you'd give to people about leadership? You know, we've got a bit of time. We'll save that for the very end, but I'd like to hear a personal story about, because, you know, leaders keeping in touch with being grounded and who they are. You know, your days in the Falklands in the war and things like that, you had to be really grounded. And seeing that picture of you back in those days when you were, under fire and all the time the aircraft were coming over from the Argentinians. We all make mistakes, and I continue to make loads of them, but what would you see as a sort of personal mistake you made in not leading so well, but then it shaped you because you learned from it to become a better leader? What would you choose?
Well, I think there are two examples, and one, of course, is directly from the Falklands, because if I made a mistake in the Falklands, it was not knowing when to disobey an order. And of course, you really do need, in any business or in the military, to build in a challenge function. So I was pinned down on the Gorse line by Bocker House and was told to withdraw by my company commander, who I loved to death, charismatic leader, but he did not have situational awareness of the ground. I responded to that in the way I should have, or at that time, and exposed myself and my organisation to enemy fire, which we took casualties. What I should have said to him was that I was in a good position, I could still engage the enemy. Momentum is continuous pressure, either in business, on your competitors, or in the battlefield. And I didn't. And really what I learned from that is there is a time to disobey orders. You need to build in a challenge function, and every organisation needs to welcome a challenge function. There's a time when that challenge function ends, you make a decision, and until you go through another cycle, then that's the end of it. But we do need to build in a challenge function in all that we do.
Yeah. There was one of your fellow officers was an attached officer from the Signals, Jim Barry. What happened to Jim? Do you know what the actual tactical situation was?
Well, Jim made a mistake, and of course he paid for it with his life. There was some white flags which went up. His platoon sergeant advised him that those white flags and the people behind it should come towards him, not him expose himself to those white flags, because of course he also didn't have full situational awareness, and from a flank there was a group of enemy who hadn't surrendered, and he was cut down in withering enemy fire. Desperate.
Very, very sad. What was the second story you gave?
The second one was, of course, the buck stops with you if you're the head of an organisation. And this fast forward 19 years to when I had the privilege to be CO2 para. And in all things you do, you're subjected ultimately to potential disruptive challenges. And this disruptive challenge was the buck stopped with me, and the organisation of which I headed was taken to an employment tribunal.
Oh, really?
It wasn't me particularly, but of course I was the head.
Yeah.
And I was determined to go to the employment tribunal because it was my organisation and our reputation. The Treasury solicitors wanted to offer the person who was taking us to the employment tribunal 750,000 K
wow.
to walk away. And I said, you cannot do this. We did not do anything wrong. Now, that's not to say that some of the troops didn't do things wrong, but again, in organisational terms and procedural terms, we didn't do anything wrong. What this really showed to me, because we won and he got no money, was the value of keeping records, because it was the fact that we could show, again in managerial terms, that all our processes were there and followed to the letter, which got us off the hook for what happened.
Great. Well done. Final, just in the last minute, top tip. For leaders practically to apply from you as an inspiring leader?
Well, I actually reversed the paradigm in a sense, because I think you learn more from when you've seen toxic leadership. And what's interesting at my stage is when people email me, it's really to do with toxic leadership, not with really good leadership. You never really can articulate what good leadership is, but you absolutely can see when toxic leadership occurs. True. And so understanding that delta between the two is really, really important. And that's why, again, we should welcome this challenge function in any organisation that we have.
Brilliant. Chip, thank you very much indeed. Great having you on the series. And congratulations on a very successful career, and also giving good advice in the news. Thank you.